A tiny town in the southwest region of Texas, only 20 miles east from El Paso, is a town with over 400 years of history and culture, a town called San Elizario. Entering the town of San Elizario, one is instantly greeted by the vast amount of unique architecture, historical landmarks, and many friendly natives. Many travel from around the region and the world to learn more about the town's past. The city has some of the most history in the entire state of Texas. But the history of the town not only affects past generations, but continues to impact many today.
No, I did not grow up here, but my dad did. He's a member of the Sanchez family here in San Elizario. My grandfather, Felipe Sanchez, brought the family from the Ruidoso area in 1917. He brought the Sanchez family from the Ruidoso area to Guadalupe, which is in Mexico, and then they moved to San Elizario.
It started out shortly after I retired. I've always been interested in Billy the Kid, the history of Billy the Kid, and I was asked to write a play. Well, prior to the play, I started volunteering with another organization that did bring me here to San Elizario from time to time. And then once I was working on the play, it's like I just fell in love with the community. I thought it was just such a peaceful, very, very nice place.
And when I was getting ready to retire and move back to El Paso, I heard about San Elizario and the opening of an art district, and got my curiosity, so I investigated. And one of the first things I did when I returned was to come and rent a place here so I could exhibit my art.
Although the history of the town dates back to hundreds of years ago, it continues to be retold by past generations. It all began in 1598 with the Juan de Oñate expedition.
Don Juan de Oñate was bringing colonists for the first time into what is now the United States. And when he crossed into what is now the United States, it was in this area. You know, he crossed in this area. Of course, there was no San Elizario here. The river was here. But he arrived here, and at that time, he was bringing quite a few colonists.
This is the area they selected to camp, rest a few days. They arrived in April. They had mass, and soldiers put on a plane. After resting a few days, they continued on to New Mexico, arrived in New Mexico in September, and colonized New Mexico. And then our history made a change. After the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, the majority of the Spaniards that survived came to this region. They established a Spanish colony. And then several years later, one of those Spaniards, Tiburcio Ortega, came to this region, and he opened a very large hacienda. But he was getting a lot of Mescalero Apache attacks, therefore he decided to move to Socorro, and he left behind the big hacienda. And all being New Spain back then, they decided to relocate the Spanish fort. They decided to relocate it here. After 52 years of service, it was decided to close down the fort for several reasons. One, the Apaches were pretty much at peace at this point because they had intermarried with the community members on both sides of the river. It was no longer necessary to have the fort here, and it was relocated. At the point that the fort closed, because it did have double walls, the adobes came down and the community came up. The adobes were utilized to construct these old buildings that you can walk through here in San Elizario. And then afterwards, it was a Mexican community that was here, and this was Mexico. We were in Mexico. However, when the river shifted, it formed an island. Eventually, San Elizario ended up in the United States.
Although the building behind me may look like a regular museum, it was actually the first public school in El Paso County. It dates back to the 1800s, and much of the building is still intact to this day. And it actually underwent remodeling to transform it into what is now known as Los Portales Museum in the heart of San Elizario.
Then in 1870 is when this building became a school. It was a Garcia Ranch house between 1850 and 1870. 1870 it it became the very first school in all of El Paso. Therefore, we had very first teacher in all of El Paso.
One event that San Elizario is famous for is the history surrounding Billy the Kid. History states that the old county jail in San Elizario was indeed the only jail that Billy the Kid was able to break into.
This is the only original photograph of Billy the Kid that he posed for. Back in these days, the cameras that they used were the old box cameras with a shroud, a black shroud that the photographer would climb into to take this picture. But for some reason, those cameras, they transferred the image, they turned the image around. His history here in San Elizario is that he broke his friend Malquiades Segura out of this jail back in the 1880s.
The jail still stands today and has been remodeled into a museum for visitors to be able to walk through and experience up close.
The El Paso County Jail Museum, okay, that was established in 1850, where the El Paso County Jail now is. There was nothing left but adobe walls and the 2 iron jail cells. They've been there since 1850. Now, I've talked to quite a few people that go visit that museum, and they tell me that when they were children in 1950, 1960, they used to come and play in the adobe walls, and they remember the iron jail cells. Of course, the iron jail cells have been there since 1850.
My father did have relatives here when we were growing up, so when I was very little, we used to visit relatives. And as soon as we would arrive, we would jump out of the car. My brothers and sisters, we would all jump out of the car. I would immediately go over to the jail and just walk around the jail and the chapel until I heard my father's whistle that it was time to get back to the vehicle.
Another event that took place in San Elizario was the Salt War. It was a devastating event that murdered many and caused many others to flee the town. Hard to believe, but the reason why the war happened was because of regular salt.
In the following year, 1877, is when the Salt War happened. It was a community against the greedy politicians that were trying to take the lands where the salts were, and the community had been guaranteed the right to haul salt. So in standing up for themselves, caused a war. Eventually, the Texas Rangers had to surrender, and they were disarmed. The Texas Rangers had to take refuge in our chapel. After a few days without food and water, they were disarmed, escorted out of town, and the hauling of salt continued until the mines closed in Mexico.
Lastly, each of them had a message for audiences and potential visitors who may want to visit San Elizario.
I just want people to, if they read about us, make plans to, bring families out here so that they're aware of the history of San Elizario and the contribution that it has for Texas history.
Oh, we just hope to continue doing the best that we can to bring people to come to San Elizario and to know about San Elizario and to be able to experience history.
Well, come visit San Elizario and enjoy your day. Hopefully you'll have a good experience. If you don't, it's okay. Still a nice place to visit. And I hope that you make it a part of your travels.
With all of the trials and tribulations that this town has undergone, it has survived, and today it thrives as a major cultural and artistic community of El Paso, Texas.